Clean her and bring her to palace, the Alpha King growled after she slaughtered half of his men. The moon hung low over the jagged peaks, silvering the jagged cliffs and casting shadows that seemed alive. From the dense trees of the cursed forest, a figure moved like smoke, silent, lethal, untouchable. She had no name that mattered here, no allegiance but her own. Her hair, dark as midnight, clung to her sweat-streaked face. Her hands were slick with the blood of the Alpha King's men, those who had dared chase her into her hunting ground. Half his soldiers were dead. Half had fled, screaming, leaving the rest to deliver the message. And now the forest seemed still, almost holding its breath. She crouched atop a boulder, surveying the clearing below. Broken arrows and shattered shields marked the remnants of her recent strike. Her chest heaved, her eyes sharp, aware that this night was far from over. Somewhere in the shadows, the Alpha King would hear of this. And when he did, she knew he would come. The Alpha King was no ordinary ruler. His kingdom spanned the jagged mountains and shadowed valleys, a land that feared him as much as it revered him. He ruled with iron and fire, yet behind the armor of his cruelty, there was a mind sharp as the blades he carried, a heart that had long been caged by duty, betrayal, and loss. And now, the tales of the woman who had shattered half of his army reached him in the dead of night. "Clean her and bring her to the palace," he growled, his voice low and full of command, yet edged with something darker, something almost like curiosity. Half of his council froze. The soldiers who had survived the attack whispered among themselves, "Why not kill her outright?" She had proven she could take men with ease. But the king's eyes, dark and calculating, burned with a strange fascination. This woman was no ordinary threat. She moved like a shadow, struck like a tempest, and had the audacity to survive the impossible. For a man who had seen countless foes fall, that was rare. The next hours passed in a tense stillness. She moved through the forest, following the faint paths only she could navigate, aware that the hunt was beginning. The leaves beneath her feet made no sound. The wind carried no warning, yet she could feel it. The pull of the Alpha King, the weight of his gaze upon her, even miles away. By the time the first rays of dawn began to pierce the forest canopy, the Alpha King himself had mounted his black stallion, his armor glinting with dark majesty. He was not alone. A few of his loyal guards, those who had not fled or fallen, followed him at a careful distance. But he needed no reinforcements for this pursuit. He wanted to see her, to witness the storm she carried within her. Through brambles and thorns, she moved like a wraith. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Why had she spared the soldiers' lives, even when she had every right to take them? Because survival was not enough anymore. She needed something more: revenge, freedom, or perhaps she did not know what it was she sought. The forest began to thin, opening to a jagged hill overlooking the kingdom below. She paused, crouching low. The palace gleamed in the distance, cold and imposing, like a fortress of stone and shadow. She had heard tales of the Alpha King, not just of his power but of his cruelty, his command over life and death. And yet, a small, foolish part of her was intrigued. The ground behind her shifted, a faint crunch of boots over frost-covered leaves. She froze, muscles taut, heart pounding. She had been followed, but by whom? She dared not look. She only waited, silent as the mist rising from the valley. Then he stepped into view. The Alpha King, imposing and terrifying, yet with an undeniable aura that drew the eyes and silenced the tongue. His armor was black as night, adorned with crimson sigils that marked him as sovereign. In his hand he held no sword, no weapon, but the weight of authority, the sharpness of a mind that calculated everything. His eyes, however, were what unsettled her most, dark and cold, yet probing, curious, and strangely alive. "Why do you run?" His voice cut through the morning mist, low, commanding, and yet edged with curiosity. "You have strength, skill, and yet you flee before me." She did not respond. She only measured him, aware that one misstep could be her last. He was no ordinary man. His presence alone carried the authority to bend wills, the aura to crush spirits. And yet she felt no fear, not yet. "You are clever," he said, taking a slow step forward. "I admire that, but cleverness does not equal survival. Come. You will not leave this forest alive if you continue alone." Her instincts screamed to flee, to vanish into the trees, to let the storm carry her away. Yet something in his tone and the way he watched her made her pause. Not fear, curiosity, recognition. And something else, a whisper of understanding, as if he knew the hunger in her heart, the fire that drove her, the pain she carried. Before she could decide, a gust of wind carried a faint sound, a horn in the distance. More of his soldiers approached. She cursed under her breath, realizing the noose was tightening. She would have to fight, again. And the thought of facing him in battle, face to face, both thrilled and terrified her. Steel rang in the valley as his men advanced, but the Alpha King remained where he was, unmoving, his eyes fixed on her. She felt the inevitability of it, the gravity that pulled her toward him. She was no longer just fighting soldiers. She was being drawn into the orbit of a man who could break kingdoms, and perhaps even her. The first soldier stepped into view, and with a single, fluid movement she struck. The forest erupted in motion. Arrows flew, blades clashed, the screams of men mingling with the wind. Yet no matter how skilled they were, they could not match her. She moved like lightning, a tempest of rage and precision. When the battle was over, she stood among the bodies, breathing heavily, hands slick with blood once more. She looked up, expecting the forest to be empty, and found him there. The Alpha King, mounted on his stallion, his armor streaked with dawn's light, surrounded by those who had survived. But his gaze was not on the soldiers, it was on her. "Enough," he said, his voice carrying over the clearing. "You will come with me, alive. Or I will send the world to claim you." She stared, defiance burning in her eyes. No chains could hold her, no man could command her. And yet something stirred deep inside her, something she had thought long dead: recognition, challenge, desire. The Alpha King dismounted slowly, every movement deliberate, controlled, as if he were weighing her very soul. "You are not like them," he said quietly. "You are dangerous, and yet I do not wish to destroy you. Not yet." For the first time in her life, someone saw her. Not as a weapon, not as a threat, not as a mere mortal, but as someone who mattered. And that realization, frightening and thrilling, made her hesitate. Chains were brought forward, forged of silver and enchanted steel, designed to hold even the strongest warrior. She struggled, resisted, yet found herself unyielding in the grip of forces she could not fully comprehend. And in that moment, as the sun rose fully over the cursed forest, she realized her path had changed. She was no longer a shadow in the woods. She was now bound to the Alpha King, to the palace, to a fate she had never imagined, and one that promised fire, darkness, and something dangerously close to hope. As she was led toward the black stallion waiting to carry her to the palace, her eyes met his once more. The Alpha King's expression was unreadable, part command, part curiosity, part something darker, something forbidden. She felt it too, a thread of connection neither could yet name, a spark that promised storms yet to come. And in the silent forest behind them, the shadows seemed to lean closer, whispering of curses, of power, of battles yet to be fought, and of a bond that would challenge the very fates themselves. The hunt had ended. But the true story was only beginning. The palace rose before her like a black monolith, its spires cutting into the sky like jagged teeth. The morning sun caught the edges of its towers, gilding them with a cold light, but the shadows between the walls were deeper than any forest she had ever known. She rode in silence, her chains clinking softly with each step of the Alpha King's stallion beside her. The men who accompanied them kept a careful distance, aware that one wrong move could cost them their lives. She had never seen anything like this place. The walls were thick and cold, carved from stone that seemed older than time itself. Gargoyles leered from the battlements, their expressions frozen in eternal malice. Windows glimmered with dark glass, reflecting the world outside like pools of shadow. Everything about the palace spoke of power, of history, and of danger. The Alpha King's hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sword, though he made no move to draw it. His eyes, dark and unreadable, never left her face. "The palace is not a prison," he said softly, his voice carrying over the quiet morning air. "It is a sanctuary, and a test. You will learn soon enough why both are necessary." She did not respond. Words were useless here. Chains bound her wrists, yes, but they could not touch the storm within her. She had fought men, monsters, and shadows alike. Yet something about this place made her pulse quicken. Not fear exactly, but a deep, cold awareness that nothing here was ordinary. Inside the palace, the halls were vast, lined with statues of kings long gone and tapestries depicting wars that had long been forgotten by history. The air smelled of dust and incense, of smoke and old stone. Servants moved quietly, their eyes lowered, their hands steady. None dared meet her gaze, and those who did flinched at the sight of her. She was not just a warrior, she was a tempest, and the palace had felt her approach. She was led to a cell, or rather, a room that was more than a prison, less than a chamber. The walls were smooth stone, but etched with runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. The chains that bound her wrists were enchanted, silver links that could not be broken by mere strength. She tested them, pulling and twisting, yet they held firm. The Alpha King watched from the doorway, his presence filling the space even as he made no move to enter. "You are strong," he said quietly, almost conversationally, "but strength alone does not grant freedom here. You will need patience and understanding, and perhaps something more." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I do not need anything from you," she said, voice steady. Every word was a declaration, a challenge. He inclined his head, acknowledging her defiance without anger. "Perhaps not," he said, "but you will find that the world outside these walls is far less forgiving than the forest where you thrived. And those who pursue you will not show mercy." For hours, she sat in the silence of her room, testing the chains, pacing the small space, listening to the sounds of the palace beyond. She could hear the soft footsteps of servants, the distant clatter of armor, the quiet hum of power that seemed to flow through the walls themselves. Yet, despite her independence and her skill, a strange unease began to settle in her chest. Later, the Alpha King returned, bringing with him a small tray of food. He did not speak as he set it before her, only meeting her eyes with that same unreadable expression. She regarded him warily, studying the lines of his face, the shadows under his eyes, the curve of his jaw. There was a strength here that went beyond physical might, a strength born of command, of experience, of something hard-won and bitter. "You eat," he said simply. "It is not optional. You will need your strength if you are to survive what comes next." She did not answer, though she accepted the food. It was plain but nourishing. She ate slowly, keeping her eyes on him, measuring every word, every movement. There was a subtle game at play here, and she could sense it. He was testing her as much as she was testing him. Days passed in a strange rhythm. The Alpha King observed her constantly, yet never spoke unnecessarily. He allowed her limited freedom within the room, sometimes bringing books, sometimes showing her artifacts of power from the palace's hidden chambers. Each day was a lesson, each lesson a reminder that she was no ordinary prisoner and he no ordinary king. And yet the tension between them grew. Every glance carried meaning, every silence a conversation. She despised him for his authority, yet could not deny the pull she felt. The fascination with a man who had survived countless betrayals, who ruled with fear yet carried a vulnerability few ever glimpsed. One night, as a storm raged outside, lightning flashing across the sky, she tried an escape. The chains clinked softly as she moved, testing the boundaries of their enchantment. She slipped through the shadows of her room, heart pounding, every sense alive. The storm's thunder masked her steps, and for a moment she thought she might succeed. But then he appeared. The Alpha King, standing silently in the doorway, cloak dripping with rain, eyes glowing with quiet amusement. She froze, chains rattling as she turned to face him. "You are clever," he said, voice low, carrying over the storm. "But cleverness is not enough." She did not speak, only watched him, and in that moment something unspoken passed between them, not fear, not anger. Something deeper, recognition, understanding, a spark of connection neither had expected. "Do you trust me?" he asked suddenly, the words cutting through the tension like a blade. "Why should I?" she replied sharply. He smiled faintly, a small curve of lips that carried both amusement and something else, something dangerous. "Because your survival may depend on it, and because, whether you like it or not, you are already part of this palace, part of this world, and perhaps part of me." Her heart beat faster, a strange foreign feeling twisting in her chest. She had faced death countless times, yet nothing had ever unsettled her like this. Like the quiet power in his gaze, the way he seemed to see her not as a weapon but as a person, a force, and perhaps even something worth saving. Days turned into nights and nights into quiet lessons. She learned the ways of the palace, the hidden corridors, the history etched into every stone. He allowed her small freedoms, each one a test, a subtle game of power and trust. She learned to move within these walls not as a prisoner but as someone still fighting, still resisting, still surviving. And he learned her, her strength, her skills, her fears, and her stubborn pride. He saw the scars beneath her armor, the moments of hesitation, the glimpses of a past filled with betrayal and loss. He saw the fire that drove her, the same fire that had cut down half his soldiers, the same fire that now burned quietly within the palace walls. One evening, as the storm subsided and the palace lay silent, he approached her room. She sat by the window, staring out at the darkening sky, chains glinting softly in the fading light. He did not knock. He did not speak immediately. He simply stood watching her, a presence so commanding that even the storm outside seemed to pause. "You have changed since you came here," he said finally, voice low. "Not in your strength, but in your understanding. You see the world differently now, do you not?" She looked at him, eyes sharp, wary. "Perhaps," she said, "but I have not changed who I am." He inclined his head, acknowledging her defiance without anger. "No," he said softly, "and that is why you may survive. Not everyone can endure these walls. Not everyone can face what lies ahead, but you, perhaps you can, and perhaps you may even thrive." Her chest tightened at the words, though she did not allow herself to show it. Thriving was not her goal. Survival was, and nothing more. Yet the flicker of something unfamiliar, a spark of trust, of curiosity, of connection, stirred quietly within her. As he turned to leave, she could not stop herself from asking, her voice quiet but firm, "Why me? Why not kill me?" He paused, his shadow falling across her as he looked down. "Because strength like yours is rare," he said simply. "Because spirit like yours is rare. And because I have seen many things in this world and few have made me wonder as you do." And with that he left, leaving her alone in the quiet room. The chains still held her, the palace still loomed, and the storm outside had faded to a whisper of rain. But inside, a new storm had begun, one that neither of them could yet name, a storm of power, of tension, of something far more dangerous: connection. The palace was quiet in the early hours of the morning, yet the silence was not empty. Every shadow seemed alive, moving in the dim light cast by flickering torches along the halls. The woman had learned the rhythms of this place, where guards walked when doors creaked, which corners hid whispers of forgotten secrets. She had grown cautious, patient, and sharp. Even in chains, she was no longer just a prisoner. She was a storm contained within stone walls. Yet curiosity gnawed at her. The Alpha King was more than a ruler, more than the man who had captured her. There was a weight in his eyes she could not read, a shadow behind his power, a darkness that clung to him like a second skin. and she wanted to know. Late one evening, when the palace was nearly empty, she slipped quietly from her room. The chains that bound her wrists were heavy, yet her movements were fluid, calculated. She had discovered a narrow passage in her room's wall, a hidden doorway, almost invisible, leading toward the inner chambers of the palace. It was forbidden territory, but she felt a pull, as if the palace itself wanted her to uncover what lay within. The corridors were narrow and twisted, carved from cold stone that had known centuries of rulers and rebellion. Her boots made no sound on the smooth floor. Torches lined the walls at intervals, casting long, flickering shadows. Every step carried her deeper into the palace's heart, and every step carried the risk of discovery. She paused before a large set of double doors, intricately carved with symbols she did not recognize. The air around them was colder, heavier, as if the stones themselves guarded what lay inside. She placed her hand on the wood, feeling the faint hum of magic, a pulse that seemed alive. With a careful push, the doors creaked open, revealing a dimly lit chamber. Inside, the room was lined with shelves filled with books, scrolls, and artifacts. Ancient tomes, some bound in leather and silver, filled the air with the scent of old pages and ink. On the walls hung maps of lands both known and forbidden, marked with strange symbols and sigils that hinted at power beyond imagination. She moved cautiously, eyes scanning the shelves, fingers tracing the spines of books that might hold answers or traps. A soft noise behind her made her freeze. She spun, but there was no one there, just the whisper of the wind through a small, high window, yet the feeling remained, the sense that she was being watched, and perhaps she was. For in the shadows, eyes glimmered with the faintest light, observing, calculating, waiting. Her gaze fell upon a single scroll lying atop a pedestal. The seal on it was unmistakable, royal, dangerous, and personal. She hesitated, then broke the seal, unrolling the parchment carefully. The words within spoke of the Alpha King's past, betrayals, wars, and the curse that had shaped him. He had once ruled a kingdom far to the north, one lost to treachery and fire. His family had been killed in a coup, leaving him with only his fury and his thirst for power. The curse, as described in the scroll, bound him to his throne in more ways than one. It demanded strength, sacrifice, and isolation. Love, companionship, even simple trust were luxuries forbidden to him. She read the words slowly, absorbing the weight of his history. The man who had captured her, who now watched her every move, had known more loss and pain than most could endure in a lifetime. The chains on her wrists suddenly felt lighter. She began to understand, not just his command, but his caution, his intensity, the quiet storm behind his eyes. A sound from the doorway made her spin. The Alpha King stood there, his presence filling the room without a word. His dark eyes regarded her with something more than suspicion. It was calculation, recognition, and perhaps relief. "You found it," he said softly. "I thought I had hidden it well." "I wanted to know," she said, her voice steady. "I wanted to know who you are, beyond the king, beyond the palace, beyond the chains." He nodded slowly, moving into the room. "Few dare seek the truth," he said, "and fewer still survive it. You are remarkable. I see now why the forest did not destroy you. And why I cannot destroy you." Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. She was beginning to see the man behind the power, the man who bore the weight of a kingdom, the past, and a curse that had hardened him. And he, in turn, was beginning to see her, not as a threat, not as a prisoner, but as a force equal to him, and perhaps a companion he had never allowed himself to imagine. Days passed, and a fragile trust began to form. He allowed her more freedom within the palace, sharing fragments of history, showing her artifacts that told stories of rulers, warriors, and sorcerers long gone. She shared little of herself, but in her eyes he could see glimpses of pain, of determination, of the fire that had driven her through forests and battlefields alike. And then came the night that changed everything. A soft rustle in the palace corridors woke her. She moved to the window, peering out into the darkened courtyard. Figures approached, cloaked, armed, moving with deadly precision. Assassins. She knew immediately they were not ordinary thieves or rebels. They were trained, silent, and intent on killing the Alpha King. She ran to his chambers, her chains clinking softly. The Alpha King was already aware, standing at the door, eyes dark with focus. "Stay close," he commanded, and she obeyed, heart racing. The palace erupted in chaos. Torches were knocked over, alarm bells rang, and guards clashed with intruders. The woman fought beside him, every strike precise, every move calculated. She had killed soldiers in the forest, yet fighting alongside him in these halls was different. There was a rhythm between them, a tacit understanding, a silent conversation in glances and motions. Together, they pushed the assassins back, room by room, corridor by corridor. Their bond, forged in tension and trust, became unspoken, undeniable. She moved to protect him as much as she fought for her own survival, and he, in turn, shielded her, his strength and skill a perfect complement to hers. Finally, they stood in the throne room, the intruders either dead or fleeing into the night. The Alpha King's chest heaved, his eyes dark, intense. She looked at him, her own breath coming in short gasps, and realized that in this moment nothing could stand between them, not fear, not chains, not even death. He lowered his gaze to her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. "You fight well," he said, voice low, almost intimate. "Stronger than I imagined." "And you," she replied, voice steady despite the adrenaline, "are not what I expected either." For a moment, silence fell between them, filled only by the distant echo of the storm outside and the soft dripping of rain from broken windows. Their eyes held, a quiet storm of emotion passing between them, respect, recognition, and something more dangerous, more fragile, and far more human. Then the silence was shattered. From the shadowed corner of the room, a single figure stepped forward, a messenger, bloodied and exhausted. In his hands was a scroll sealed with black wax, the emblem of a rival kingdom. The Alpha King took it, breaking the seal with deliberate care. His eyes darkened as he read. He turned to her, face unreadable but tense. "This changes everything," he said. She stepped closer, instinctively sensing the weight of what he had read. "What is it?" "An army," he said quietly, voice tight. "A rival kingdom knows of your presence here and of our bond. They will come for you, and for me." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended over both of them. She felt the cold twist of dread, yet it was mixed with something unexpected, a thrill, a recognition of the danger and of the bond that had begun to form between them. He looked at her then, truly looked, for the first time without the mask of the king, without the armor of authority. "We face this together," he said softly, "and when it comes, nothing will be the same." Her pulse quickened. She had survived forests, battles, and betrayals. She had walked with death and stared into its eyes. Yet standing here beside the Alpha King, knowing what was coming, she felt a strange truth. She was not alone. And in that alone, perhaps, there was a chance for something neither of them had expected: trust, connection, even redemption. They stood together, the storm outside fading to the distant sound of thunder, knowing that the night had revealed more than danger. It had revealed them, to each other, to their own hearts, and to a future neither could yet foresee. And in the shadows of the throne room, hidden and watching, another presence stirred, whispering of threats yet to come, of powers that would challenge their strength, their trust, and their very hearts. The sky above the palace had turned to steel, clouds swirling as if the heavens themselves were preparing for war. The distant army of the rival kingdom crested the hills, banners snapping in the wind, their numbers vast, disciplined, and merciless. Smoke from burning villages in the valley below drifted toward the palace, a dark reminder of what awaited them if they failed. Inside the palace, the Alpha King and the woman moved through the corridors with purpose. The halls, once quiet and shadowed, now echoed with the rush of preparation. Guards readying weapons, servants securing gates, and soldiers sharpening swords for the battle to come. But the tension between the two central figures was unlike anything else. It was not fear nor simple duty. It was recognition of the bond that had grown between them, forged in shared danger and quiet understanding. "You are ready," he said quietly, his voice low but firm. "The army outside does not know what awaits them, but neither do we. We face them together." She met his gaze, eyes sharp, heart steady. "I am ready for the battle and for what comes after," he nodded. There was no need for words. They both knew that this battle would test more than their skill with blades or strategy. It would test their trust, their courage, and the unspoken connection that had grown between them. The first clash came at dawn. The gates of the palace groaned under the pressure of battering rams, and arrows rained down like a silver storm. The woman moved like a shadow, cutting through the enemy ranks with precision, her chains now symbolic rather than restrictive. Each swing of her blade, each calculated strike, was a testament to her skill, her will, and her determination to survive, and to protect the man who had become more than a king to her. The Alpha King fought alongside her, commanding his soldiers with sharp authority, his presence a force that rallied their courage. He was not only a leader in the field but a warrior unmatched in skill. Together they moved as a unit, a storm of shadow and steel, cutting a path through the advancing army. Hours passed in a blur of chaos, sweat, and blood. The palace walls shook under the force of siege engines, yet the defenders held their ground. And in the eye of the storm, the king and the woman found moments of silent coordination, their movements almost instinctual. One would flank the enemy, the other would cover the approach. One would strike, the other would shield. It was a dance born of trust, of understanding, and of something far deeper, an unspoken promise that neither would fall while the other lived. By midday, the battle had reached a turning point. The enemy had suffered heavy losses, their formation broken, their morale shaken by the unexpected ferocity of the defenders and the uncanny coordination of the Alpha King and his mysterious companion. Yet victory was far from certain. From the North Tower, a figure emerged, cloaked in black, wielding a blade that seemed to shimmer with dark energy. The woman felt a shiver run through her as recognition struck. This was no ordinary soldier. It was a master assassin sent to end the Alpha King and anyone who stood with him. She turned to him, tension coiling in her chest. "It is him," she said quietly. He nodded, eyes narrowing, jaw set. "Then we end this together." They moved as one, racing toward the assassin, navigating the shattered corridors and debris-strewn halls. The fight was fierce, each strike a test of strength and skill, each movement calculated for survival. The woman's blade met the assassin's, sparks flying with every clash, while the Alpha King advanced, his presence a storm that no darkness could hold. At the crucial moment when the assassin seemed to gain the upper hand, the woman acted. With precise timing, she disarmed him, sending the dark blade clattering across the floor. The Alpha King struck swiftly, a calculated move that ended the fight. The assassin fell, defeated but alive, a reminder that cruelty and vengeance could be tempered with mercy. Breathing heavily, they stood side by side, their armor battered, their bodies bruised, yet unbroken. The palace was quiet once more, the enemy either vanquished or retreating into the distant hills. In that moment, they both understood the truth they had been moving toward since the first night she had arrived. Their fates were no longer separate. They were bound not by chains nor by duty but by trust, by respect, and by the quiet recognition of something neither could yet name. The Alpha King looked at her, his dark eyes softening, a rare vulnerability surfacing. "You are remarkable," he said quietly. "Not just for your strength but for your heart, for your will, for the courage to face what no one else could." She met his gaze, a faint smile curving her lips despite the exhaustion and the blood that streaked her face. "And you," she said softly, "are more than the king I feared. You are the man I never expected." For a long moment, silence filled the hall, heavy and full of meaning. The storm outside had passed, leaving the air crisp, almost still. The palace, scarred by battle, stood as a testament to endurance, to power, and to the bond that had grown between two souls who had faced death and darkness together. He stepped closer, the chains that had once bound her now forgotten, their presence almost ceremonial in their insignificance. "I cannot promise that the future will be easy," he said quietly, "but I can promise that we will face it together." Her eyes softened, the fire in them mingling with something new, trust, hope, and a strange, fragile warmth she had never allowed herself to feel. "Then we will," she said simply, her voice steady, yet carrying the weight of all they had endured. The palace slowly returned to life. Guards patrolled the halls, tending to the wounded, repairing the damages of battle. Servants moved with careful steps, the memory of terror still fresh in their minds. Yet amidst the recovery there was a sense of renewal, of possibility. The Alpha King had faced the challenge of both external enemies and his own hidden darkness, and he had not faltered. She walked beside him through the throne room, now scarred but still majestic. The walls bore the marks of combat but also of survival. The king's hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sword, but his eyes, for once, were not filled with command or suspicion. They were steady, reflective, and alive with unspoken emotion. "You have changed this palace," he said softly, almost to himself. "And perhaps you have changed me." She glanced at him, a flicker of understanding passing between them. Change was dangerous. Change was terrifying. And yet in this moment it was undeniable. They had both been shaped by fire, by battle, and by trust forged in the storm. And neither could return to what they had been before. The night settled over the palace, calm and quiet, yet filled with the unspoken promise of the future. The Alpha King and the woman stood together on the balcony, looking out over the lands they had fought to protect, the kingdom that would bear the marks of their struggle for years to come. "You will stay?" she asked quietly, breaking the silence. He looked at her, dark eyes soft but unwavering. "Yes," he said simply, "not because I command it, but because I choose it, and because you have shown me that strength can exist with compassion, that trust can exist with power. You have taught me more than you know." A wind swept through the balcony, lifting strands of her hair, carrying the faint scent of rain and smoke. She nodded slowly, a sense of peace settling over her. "Then I will stay," she said, "because this place and perhaps you are worth it." For the first time in centuries, the Alpha King allowed himself a small, genuine smile. "Then we will face the world together," he said. "No shadow, no enemy, no curse will break what we have found." And as they stood there, side by side, the palace behind them and the kingdom before them, the night sky seemed to hold its breath, witnessing the bond forged in fire, blood, and trust. They were no longer prisoner and king, predator and hunted, storm and shadow. They were partners, equals, and something more, a connection that promised not just survival, but redemption, and perhaps, in time, even love. Beyond the walls, the distant lands stirred. The rival kingdoms had retreated for now, but whispers of new threats traveled on the wind. Curses, long dormant, began to stir once more in hidden places. And yet, the Alpha King and the woman knew that together, they could face whatever came. They had fought death and darkness, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and bound by something neither had expected. The palace, scarred but enduring, stood as a monument to their journey. And on the highest tower, where the storm had once raged fiercest, the first light of dawn broke through, casting gold and crimson across the walls. It was a symbol, they both knew, not just of victory, but of transformation, of survival, and of a bond that would endure far longer than any storm, any battle, or any curse. And somewhere deep within the palace, The quiet pulse of magic, of history, and of destiny reminded them both. This was not the end. It was only the beginning.